you're joined by me, Scarlett and Nellis. Today, we're going to be learning about just one subject, theatre! There are all sorts of jobs in theatre. Today, we're going to be talking about only 3 of them. Firstly, we're joined by Catherine Moore, and she's a props mistress at her theatre. So Catherine, can you tell us a little bit about your job?
Right, yes. I'm the props mistress of the People's Theatre in Heaton, Newcastle upon Tyne. I've done that job for about 10 years. And what props is basically short for properties. So it's getting everything on the stage. There's furniture, food, drink, anything that the actors need to actually perform the play. So you have to read the play, see what time period it's set in, and then get all the bits and pieces you need to make the play look effective. So this one here was set in Georgian Britain in about the 18th century. So you had to have furniture and pictures and candlesticks and all sorts of things that make it look like this was a 18th century house in Newcastle.
Wow, that's really interesting. So what's the hardest thing you've ever had to find?
Well, literally today we are starting work on a play called Hay Fever, which is set in the 1930s, and we need a big grand piano, not one that's sit up against the wall, but one of those freestanding ones. I think the director wants it to be white as well, so I'll be ringing round and round and round, and the cheapest I can find one for is about £1,000. We haven't got that sort of money because we're only an amateur production company, so we're going to have to beg, borrow or steal, I think.
Oh, wow. And finally, what's the most funny or memorable thing that's ever happened in your theatre?
Well, we were doing a play called Pig Stew that had been written by a playwright featuring a pig. And she has to pretend to her brothers and sisters that she's boiled up their brother and put him in some stew. And she serves the stew in a big casserole, and she gets very cross with her brothers and sisters and she slammed the lid down really, really, really heavily, and the whole casserole just cracked open, and the casserole just ran straight off the table, right across the stage, and soaked the feet of a lot of people sitting in the front row.
And was this supposed to happen?
No.
Oh, wow. You can find out about all the different jobs by looking in the theatre programmes. Now, we will be talking to an actor, Dave Nellis, my dad. So, Dave, how did you first get into acting?
Well, I was at comprehensive school and I had a really good drama teacher, and she saw me in a play and she said that I was very talented in her opinion, and that I should think about a career as a professional actor, which I'd never thought about before. So I stayed on at school and took a drama A-level and an English A-level. Then I took a year out and then applied to drama school down here in London, which was a 3-year training, and I graduated in 1991. That's 24 years that I've been an actor.
And what is the hardest thing about being an actor?
That's quite easy to answer, really. The hardest thing is that you have to cope with a lot of rejection, and you must learn never to take it personally. So if you go up for a play or a television series, the director and the producer might be seeing up to 50 people or more, and they might want somebody who's taller or shorter or has brown hair, blue eyes, and so that's hard to deal with, that you mustn't take it personally. It's not really about doing it for celebrity or glamour or the red carpet or anything like that. You do it because you absolutely love it, and sometimes that means being away from home and you might miss your family. Not me. And it's quite disruptive on family life, so it can be quite hard at times.
And finally, what is the most funny or strangest thing that's ever happened on stage?
Back in, I think it was around 1994, I was doing a play in London called Erpingham Camp, and it's by a writer who's very famous called Joe Orton, and he writes very physical farce comedy, very funny. And I was chasing this actor around the stage and up tables and down chairs and things like that, and I was chasing him so hard that in front of the whole audience his trousers fell down. But because it was a comedy, it actually worked in our favour and we got a few extra laughs, which is always good.
Okay, thanks.
you sort things out. And then you realise it's tough. And of course the tradition with Puck is that he floats around and he's this little sweet little boy. But you know, and I think it's the same. Now I don't know how I've understood that about Puck, but I haven't quite. But let's have a look at it.
Now we'll be speaking to director Chris Keller. So, Chris, can you explain a little bit about the job of the director?
Yeah, so the job of the director in theatre is to really depends actually. Sometimes they come up with the idea for the show and they bring everyone together and they bring all the stage management team and they bring the producer and the actors and they create the piece from that. Sometimes a director is brought on later, so the producer will get everyone together and he'll decide who the director is going to be, and they'll work like that. And then they direct the actors to create the show, and they'll have the overall vision of the show. So they'll decide how the show's going to look, how the show's going to sound. So they'll deal with all the sound issues, lighting as well. Often they'll decide how it's going to look altogether, the show. So they have the overall eye on the show. I have feelings about the director that is slightly different to that. So I think the director really brings the right people together, and by bringing the right people together, they then decide as one what the show is going to be. So that's how I tend to look at directing, rather than having one person decide what the whole thing is. I think everybody decides what it's going to be, and they create it together, and then the director's kind of shapes it at the end. So if you imagine like a piece of clay, the director kind of moulds it to the way they want it to be.
Okay. Does a play always have to come from a script?
No. So the way I personally direct is what's called devised theatre, which is relatively modern. It was invented really by Joan Littlewood, who ran the Stratford Theatre Royal in Stratford, East London, and she was the first director to really bring devised theatre in this country to the public in a way that became quite well known. And the way that devised theatre works is that you come up with a subject. So our subject might be a kitchen, and we start with that theme. And from the first day of rehearsals, we try and brainstorm what's in a kitchen, objects that we might have in a kitchen, what kind of things happen in a kitchen, what food might be cooked. And from that, you might get a writer who will then create scenes. And those scenes then get rehearsed by the actors, and then the director and the writer, they'll shape those scenes so that you can try and create a play. And at the beginning of the rehearsals, you don't know what that play is going to be and how good it might be and how dramatic it might be, but that's my role as a director, is to try and work out what is going to be entertaining for an audience.
And Chris, what is the most weird thing that's ever happened whilst you've been directing?
The most weird thing that ever happened while I was directing was I was directing a show which was all it all had glass. It was glass panels, and there was 4 big sheets of glass at the front of the stage, and the audience were all watching, and the action happened behind the glass. But the way the lighting happened was that the lighting would shine onto the glass and it would reflect different images. But the lights were so hot that one night on stage, the actors were all behind it, and the audience were watching, and it had been there'd been a matinee show, so 2 shows in one day, and the glass just smashed on stage, and it all just cracked, and it was a brilliant stage effect, and just crumbled onto the stage, and the curtain came down, and we finished the show.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Pleasure.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.